Igniters, the podcast that sets your soul ablaze. I'm Jenna Wilmers here alongside my co-host, Fran Malfer, and we have a wonderful message for you today about nurturing your fire. And we're going to use the example of one man who exemplified this from the Bible. You may have heard of him. His name is Noah.
Well, I certainly have heard of Noah. What I remember of him is that he built the biggest ever boat, or what they called then an ark, because God asked him to.
Can you imagine that?
Not
Can
at
you
all.
imagine that conversation and how that went? Where he's like, hey, Noah, I want you to build a boat in the middle of the desert.
And not a little boat, by the way. It's got to be this big. Well, I love that Noah kind of helps us illustrate what it's like for us to nurture our fire and to make it an active thing in our life. I mean, I wouldn't have been excited about that myself.
I wouldn't have wanted to build a big thing over day after day. I mean,
No.
They said it took him, almost 75 years, between 50 and 75 years to build it. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that kind of labor each and every day. It'd be like living Groundhog's Day. That wouldn't be fun at all.
It would. It really would. But the interesting thing, too, is I think I would have said, oh, sure, God, I could build a boat, thinking of a normal size boat.
Yes.
But this was really something much bigger than a normal size request. And what we really think about that when we see Noah is that became and was really his life assignment, if you think about it.
Right. And the other thing is that in order for him to keep going, I would think that he would have to have that passion that the Lord placed inside of him from, the get-go.
That's right.
And we all have a passion or a gift or talent that is placed inside us when we're born. I mean, the Lord and even the Bible tells us that we're supposed to fan into flame the gift of God.
That's right.
That He gives us. And
That's right.
so I think it would help with that Groundhog's Day feeling.
Well,
have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah, I have. And what's really interesting, too, is I think about the fact that, children are born, and one of the first things that they love to do is they think about how can they please their parents when they're little. Sometimes it's not that way. But I think that Moses said yes because he really wanted to please God. And so how do we respond to the things that God has given to us? I like that we aren't told a lot about Noah. We don't know for certain whether he was just a guy who worked a farm.
Right.
But I'm guessing he had gifts and talents that we didn't know about that God did. And I think some of those have to do with maybe he was a master boat builder.
Right. Well, and everything that he had and did was a process. It wasn't something that he just walked into one day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a athlete who's in, the professional sports world. They don't, like Tom Brady did not wake up one day and go, hey, I'm the GOAT, the greatest of all time, right? He had to nurture that. He had to practice.
Yeah.
He had to make sacrifices and things like that. And so I think that when the Lord places these things in front of us, sometimes we look at them like the big elephant instead of, one bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I know for us, the Lord placed some, big, hairy, audacious goals or BHAG in front of us.
He sure did.
But I love how he turned it around for us.
Mm-hmm. Jenna already mentioned that it took quite a long time to build that particular ark. But the most incredible thing for me, given where I am in my life at this season, Noah was 500 years old at the time. Now, that back then may have seemed like a young life, but that's something that is, like she said, kind of a BHAG. But he had that life assignment. He was ready to do what God wanted. And so kind of through Noah's story, God shows us that it's about his strength, not ours.
That's right.
Right?
And so that kind of shifts the BHAG from big, hairy, audacious goal to be humble and allow God.
Amen. Amen. I like that it was a shift that had to take place, because in most of our lives, when we're ready to do something different, it requires taking a lot of mind shifting, maybe, looking at things from a different perspective. So there are ways in which we can do what Noah did.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little more about that, but we're going to let you know that there are 6 things that we think can help you.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is obvious, I think, to most of us, and that is that we really do want always God's guidance.
Yeah.
You can imagine, as we said, what that conversation must have been like for Noah and for God when God asked him to build that ark. Noah would have had to stop. He would have had to reimagine what his future was going to look like, because it was going to change completely. And especially given the assignment that God had given to him to do.
Right.
So from there, we also understand that seeking God is one way in which Noah understood how, because God gave him everything he needed. Isn't that wonderful? Mm-hmm. He gave him everything that he needed. So he was the architecture of the boat. He told him exactly how big and how long, and it had to be. So he also had to be on guard sometimes to make sure he didn't allow, in the midst of such a big thing, to let negative self-talk. And I'm pretty sure the people around Noah were like, "What are you doing, man?"
You're crazy.
Right. A
In
lot
the
of
middle
negative.
of the desert, what are you thinking? There's no water.
Right, right. So you can have your own self-negative talk, or you can have negative talk from other people. And I'm sure that along the way, he must have been thinking that this is a mistake, and he had to learn how to lean on God. So seeking his guidance and leaning on him is the only way that you're going to overcome the situations that are in front of you, just like Noah had to do. So we kind of want to just encourage you to remember what the Word of God says I think it's a Proverbs 3:5. He says, "Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways," not just one or two of your ways, but all of your ways, acknowledge and trust the Lord, and He's going to direct your path.
You also got to understand, too, is that sometimes you don't always get the end result when the Lord asks us to do things, because it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's not just a quick thing that's going to happen overnight. I mean, God is really our tour guide in life. And so, a tour is not over in 5 minutes.
No.
It takes some time, and they explain things and they point things out. And it's just super critical that you seek God's guidance in everything you do, because He is the one that's going to help you figure out what's next or how to overcome any obstacle that is placed in front of you.
And I hope that gives you a sense of encouragement, right? Because whatever it is that God has designed for you, He's made every provision for you, and He's the one who's going to help you succeed in that direction.
It sure is.
Yeah.
The second thing to nurturing your gift is to seek higher or continuing education. And while Noah might have been a master craftsman or boat builder, as we say, he didn't possess those skills, as we kind of touched on, and he didn't, wake up one day with them. He had to build on them. It was through years and years of hard work. And you can imagine if it took 50 to 75 years to build this massive thing, you probably learn things along the way. I mean, when you're building or crafting something, you learn as you go, and you're like, oh, I should go back and redo that. So you can imagine that he probably had some of those similar experiences.
We just had a little experience, and I'm talking little experience with that, in that we were recently together putting a new desk together.
Yes.
And then we laughed because we had instructions. They were not great, but we had some instructions, and we were following them to the best of our ability. But just as Jenna said, there were things we didn't do quite right.
Right.
We had to stop, reassess, and we had to undo some of our work and reconfigure it in
We
order
did.
for it to become the desk it really could become.
Right. and it wasn't any fault of our own. It
No.
was we were reading the directions and they just were not clear enough. And again, if you don't seek God's guidance, the directions are not going to be clear enough. So you're going to have to. So that can also make you have to go back and redo things.
Well, that's why the continuing education of your life. I mean, that's the part where we're saying you combine what God wants to give to you with what you can also learn on your own through various means. Maybe it's a YouTube video. Maybe if we'd had that, it would have worked a lot
Right.
better. But you're always seeking to build your skills. And so that's what we want you to understand is it's not a one-time done thing. That's one of the things that's really exciting is there's so much in our world today through social media and many other ways that we can continue to grow and activate the gifts that God has given to us.
That's so true. I mean, you got what? YouTube, Pinterest,
TikTok.
Right. There's so many how-tos, places, blogs, all that stuff. Newspapers, I mean, they still print those in some places. A lot of them are online now. But, so there's today's world, there's never been an easier way to find an answer. I mean, could you imagine if Noah had a question, what his process would have been to be like, hey, I'm kind of struggling with this. How do I figure it out? Well, in the middle of the desert, you don't have many people to ask or go to. So that kind of could have been a little rough for him.
Well, I think that really goes to sort of the next point, right? Is that I'm sure he had people around him. And one of the things we certainly have learned is that we needed to seek people who were a little further along in their journey than we were. In other words, who'd sort of traveled the same path that we were trying to travel. And that we call mentors.
Yes.
And having mentors is really important. So, yeah, Noah didn't have the social media. He didn't have all that, but he had God as his mentor. And he actually understood what it meant to listen well and to follow what the mentor said. Because we all think we know things better sometimes. But the truth is, when we have a mentor, they help to develop us at a much quicker rate than if we were trying to do things on our own. So you kind of got to think back to what Jenna was saying about the athletes. I don't like exercising a lot, but in order to, we were talking about that a little, but in order to develop a stamina of any kind, even at my age, I may not be an athlete, but there are things I have to do to stay active.
Yeah.
Right? In order to keep the bones going and keep everything going. So I really kind of like that analogy that you presented about the athletes training. They're doing everything that they can. So when you seek out mentors, that's like having a coach. Really,
Yes.
it's like having a coaching staff, or maybe you need one or two mentors to help you in that direction.
Well, I mean, even athletes have the best trained coaches that maybe have played the sport or have learned how to train the best athletes in order to be able to condition them to be ready for what they're going to face out on whatever field or court they play on.
That's right. And it's interesting when we say mentors, it doesn't mean somebody that you actually sit across the table from. Sometimes you don't meet them, but they're still your mentor.
We have lots of mentors that we
do.
at least people that we call mentors, but we've never met them.
That's right. That's right. I recently had the privilege of being at a big convention filled with lots of people who were in the same place that I was, and I couldn't get enough of it. Jenna had that same opportunity a year ago. You will be so surprised what a mentor can pour into your life in such a quick way to help you be motivated to activate the very gifts that God has given to you.
Yes. So the next step in nurturing your fire is to develop disciplines. This one's kind of hard because a lot of people want to be disciplined, they want to be regimented, but they don't know how to get started.
It's true.
And then when they do get started, they are like, oh, well, I didn't do good enough, so I'm just not going to continue. I mean, hello, look at New Year's Eve. We've all set that New Year's
We have.
goal
The
and
resolutions are numerous.
yes, to be able to do this or that or whatever. And by the end of January, it's out the window.
Yep.
You know? And really, we got to stop beating ourselves up. And I say that because when I first started workout regiment, I decided, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a calendar. I'm going to put it on the wall. I'm going to mark off the days that I went to the gym. And the first month didn't look so great, but I did it. And that's all that mattered. And so then my goal was to beat the next month to beat the month before.
That's cool.
Until I finally was able to build a regiment to where now I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum where if I don't go to the gym, it's bad. Like, and not in a bad way, but it's just like my body is so used to getting up and doing that. And so I need that boost in the morning. So you can get there, but it sometimes takes baby steps. And
Yes.
I mean, you got to think with Noah, he had to build these disciplines because he did this every day for, between 50 to 75 years.
Amazing.
I mean, the ark was 440 feet long. I mean, that's equivalent to 1 1/10 the length of a football field.
Wow. Think about that.
Think about that. And again, go back to that conversation that God and Noah are having when he's like, hey, Noah, I want you to build an ark, and I want it to be 440 feet long. I mean, seriously?
I imagine his eyes just kind of went up in his head like he's trying to envision how big is that?
Well, and what kind of measuring tools did they have back then?
I think.
So was he like 440 feet? Or pacing it out?
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, then you also got to think it was 72 foot wide. So that's the equivalent of 1 1/10 of a bowling lane.
Wow.
So not only do you have a football field long, but then you have a bowling lane wide. And then on top of that, 43 feet high. So that is approximately a 3-story building.
I can't even begin to fathom it. It goes back to something you said earlier about, some things are so big you can't almost think, how is it possible?
Yeah.
How is it possible to do that? I'm sure he was going, really, God?
Why me?
Yeah, why me? How do you have a deadline?
Yes. Well, that's the other thing. Is there a deadline? How fast? Where am I going to get all the wood for this?
Yeah.
The tools. Yeah. Is someone going to help me, or do you expect me to do this by myself?
Exactly.
I mean, those are questions I'd be asking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you got to think, by the way, then God says, by the way, you're building this in the desert where there's no water.
Makes no sense, right? So there are times in our lives that God is going to ask us to do things that make no sense in our thinking. Yeah. But here's the thing that Noah represents to us, that when God is with you, and God's the one who signed you, and God's the one who gave you the gifts and the talents, it can be accomplished. And I really, really love that. He had the discipline to do that. We were talking about it today. I'm a procrastinator. Okay, that's my confession to you. It's something I really have to work on. But Jenna's my encourager. And I think that when Noah had those moments when he was like, I just cannot get up today and hammer another nail or whatever they were using in this, it just doesn't feel like it's ever going to get there. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm just so done. That he had God, just like I have Jenna, saying, you can do this. I know I made you for this. And that's what you have in your life. God made you for something. So I'm still working on not procrastinating and developing disciplines. But it is an ongoing part of the journey that we're on.
It is. And, remember what Colossians 3:23 says. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters.
And it's a hard one to remember because, as I said, Jen and I spend a lot of time talking about our own personal lives. And along with all of the procrastination, there's this tendency in any one of us to want to say, well, what are people going to think? How are they going to respond to me? Don't you love that verse where it says you don't have to think about that?
But then that also makes it so it should be easier to remember that everything we're doing is for God. It's God's
Amen.
work. It's
That's
not
right.
ours, not our neighbors, not yours, not yours. It's God's work. And that's kind of a cool thing to be
Absolutely.
a part of. I think.
Absolutely. I kind of just sort of knowing that makes, there's a sense of more freedom in that. So along with some of the things that we were talking about with how you activate and nurture your gifts, seeking God's counsel, going through and having mentors, developing these disciplines, there's another way that we can also nurture the gifts that God has given to you. And this is one that we don't do very well either, but it proves that things can be done in ways, and that is to embrace, I mean, seriously, let's embrace God's timing.
Oof,
You
that
know,
one's so hard.
when you were saying that experts believe that Noah took somewhere from 55 to 75 years to build the ark, this whole concept took an immense amount of resilience and relentless courage.
Oh,
The courage part, to be resilient is just to have that stamina to keep going. But courage is saying, I can do this. I know that I have a God behind me who can do this. So can you imagine? I mean, I'm trying to imagine working on a project that big.
I'm
For
sure there were
55
days.
years.
I mean, I'm sure there were days where he was like, "Is this ever gonna end?" I mean, because I wouldn't
Yeah,
be
I-
saying that, you know. But we also have to recognize that all the choices
Yeah.
that we make, they have weight. And what if Noah had procrastinated on building the ark?
Seriously.
Then when the flood came, he wouldn't have been ready.
That's
now,
right.
I believe that the Lord held it off until he was ready, but. Yeah, maybe the Lord did have a deadline.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know that. But that was Noah giving us the example that yes, you have to wait on God's timing because his timing's always perfect.
Yeah.
Whether in the moment it may not feel that way, and I mean even in disappointment, we sometimes people get angry at God because it's like, well, God, why would you want this for me? Well, sometimes when there's a negative feeling attached to something, it's actually God's protection.
Right.
And I don't think that we remember that until
It's so
we get
true.
one more step down the road and we reach what we were trying to reach, and then we, look back in that hindsight 2020 and go, oh yeah, I'm glad it happened that way, because if it happened this way, then I'd be over here and not over here where I should be. And so I don't think we take that reflective tone from it.
I agree with you. You know, we're saying to embrace, and we mean that because that's not always an easy thing to do. You're right. We don't always take that. But the other thing is that I've heard people say things like, well, I've prayed, and God doesn't answer me. And again, it's not that God is not answering, right? It's about waiting patiently for God to say, right now, this is the moment you need it. I'm just going to give you a little tiny example, but I love to buy books. We love to read. But I have in the past bought a book thinking, oh, this is the book I read right now, gotten home and put it on a shelf. And it may be a year, it could be 2 years. And all of a sudden, something is going on in my life. And I'm thinking, oh, I bought this book. And I start reading it, and everything that I need to know from the Lord through the author who has penned this book is speaking to me right then and there. If I'd read it 2 years before, I might have retained some of it. But when you're in the midst of something and you start to get that kind of God has a timing, wait for it, you can be excited and say, oh, now I know why you had me wait.
Yes. Well, they sink in, but also they hit you a little harder too.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, oh, yes, I totally can relate to that as well.
Yeah. So the final thing that, I think we've been sharing already with you is that I'm sure that Noah in the building of the ark had some failures. Maybe he didn't have the right pitch of a roof, or maybe he needed something that he started 50 years ago is starting to come apart and he has to go back. So we learn from the things that we might consider to be failures. And that's the best way often to learn is when you think about it. So along the way, Noah would have learned a much better way to do things than he did 50 years before. So even though it was a progressive task.
The other thing is with people too. Some people will come into your life for a season. And so over 55 years to 75 years, a lot of different people could have come in. We don't know who helped him or if he had help, but people could have, been like, oh, I heard what you're doing and I want to be a part of it. So those people could have come and also poured into Noah as well. And so that's also going to translate in your life. You're going to have people that come into your life at certain moments and help you do things or teach you a new way to do something better, or show you that you could look at, the different sides of coins.
Absolutely.
Too. And giving people that space to be able to do that in your life too. I think sometimes we walk around with this bulletproof, like, I know what I'm doing, and really, like, it's okay to not know. It's okay to it's okay to not succeed, because you draw on that experience to start again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we're trying to say to you is that a failure is not really a failure.
It's really not.
We may have mentioned this on a previous podcast, but it really is something we like to repeat. Failure is just your first attempt in learning something. So when you look at it and say, well, that failed, no, the answer is, what can I learn? What can I learn from what just happened? And I know in my life, and I'm sure this happened with Noah, is that sometimes God has to, teach you something and you think you have it.
Oh,
right?
These are
I'm like, yay.
Not so nice.
Okay, great. I got it, God. I hear you this time. I'm not going to do that ever again. And then time goes by, and what happens? We're right back at that same place, and we're back to saying, oh no. So sometimes God will bring us right back into situations where he says, did you really catch what I was saying to you? So he may make us go back to places and teach us something in a deeper way, kind of like if you think about peeling the layers of an onion.
Yes.
A lot of people use that expression, the layers of an onion, but it really can be true in our lives. I've experienced it myself. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to see things from a different perspective.
Yes, and even with that as well, like sometimes even though you might feel like you're right back into that lesson again, the lesson is deeper.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
you think you thought you knew it the first time, but again, you learned more, you have more experience, you have more life experience as well. And so then when you put that all together, that lesson just kind of hits a different chord, because you're like, oh yeah, well that also applies to this.
Yeah.
And again, I think that those blinders, we almost have like blinders on.
We do.
Where it's just like, well, I'm only going to learn this one lesson. Well, really, our lessons could be multiple lessons if we allowed them to be. But that also takes self-reflection and the courage to actually admit that, like, oh, yes, I identify with that.
I was just thinking, as Jenna was speaking, can you imagine the day that God said, Noah, it's done?
Oh, man, yes.
And and he had, as we know the story goes, he had more than just the building of the ark. He had the gathering of the animals and the people who would be in that particular thing. But can you imagine that moment? It's done. You've done it. And you were successful at it. It's not
Yes.
just that I did it. It's that because I did the things that God asked, I looked to him for direction. I look to those people in my life, mentors, right? You did the discipline thing. I'm going to follow her in that, by the way. And I mean, just the ability to stop and say, you know, with God, everything's possible. And we hope you hear that today. It's all possible when God's with you. And if you're worrying about what is my life about, he's going to tell you.
Just got to ask him.
There you go. That's right. Well, thanks for tuning in. It's been a joy to spend some time with you again. We always want to remind you that we are available to see us on our Facebook page. You can also get to us through our website. We have different platforms where you can view the YouTube or I think it's
Spotify,
Thank
Google,
you.
know,
Yeah.
things like that.
She's the social person. She knows all of those kinds of things.
She's learning them.
And we're really excited to say that our next episode, we're going to be exploring, and I mean exploring, how to nurture your gift with actionable points.
Yes, activating your gift.
That's
is
it.
going to be awesome.
It's really what God has asked us to do. We're here to really empower you into who God says. We want you to become activated and ignited into the very flame of your very life. So thanks for joining us today.
Don't forget to check out our Sparks of Wisdom that drop every Tuesday and Thursday. And please subscribe and share our podcast with your friends and family, especially if you find it helpful to you. We are just so thankful for you, and we'll see you next time. Now go out and set the world on fire.